Hey guys, I know that the fungal life cycle thing was really hard. And part of that reason that it's so hard is because fungi do this weird thing that is so unfamiliar to us. So what I wanted to do is create this little video that will give you guys something that you're more familiar with to anchor on, and then we can talk about how plants and fungi are different. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the animal life cycle, which you guys are familiar with because you are an animal. And then we'll talk a little bit about how plants are different from animals. And then we'll talk about fungi eventually, because they are the weirdest of all the life cycles. So before we get into that, though, I just want to make sure that everybody is familiar with the term ploidy. And this just is talking about the number of copies of chromosomes in a nucleus. Okay, so there's different ploidy levels, and plants are weird and they can have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. Like ferns have thousands of copies of each chromosome, but for the most part, we're going to just focus on diploid, which we call 2N, which means we have 2 copies of each chromosome. I'm not going to write all that out. Okay, di meaning 2, ploidy meaning the number of chromosomes, and then we have our haploid, which is just 1 copy of each chromosome. Okay, so those are terms that you're going to want to be familiar with, because that's going to make this life cycle thing a little bit easier to do. And then when we get to the fungi, we'll talk about this weird thing that only fungi do, but we'll get there. And so I'm not going to talk about that right now. Okay. So first of all, let's just remind ourselves the animal life cycle. So I'm going to, the way that I learned this, and I thought it was really helpful analogy was, I'm going to draw a fence here. Okay, and so on this side of the fence is going to be where our diploid cells are. And on this other side of the fence is going to be where the haploid cells are. And in order to get from the diploid side of the fence to the haploid side of the fence, we have to go through a gate by doing some kind of cellular process. And the same is true from going from haploid side of the gate to the diploid side of the gate. So we need another gate over here that will let us back into the diploid side of the fence. Okay, so that's true of all the organisms. We're going to start talking about animals, which I'm going to write over here. Okay. Animals we're familiar with. When animals are diploid, they're generally, sorry, let me say that again. When animals are multicellular, they're generally diploid. Now, remember that the first rule of biology is that there's always an exception to the rule. But right now, for our intro course, we're learning about the rules. So not about the exceptions. You can learn about the exceptions later. Right now, let's learn the rule. So this is where we have our multicellular stage as a diploid. Okay, so I'm just going to draw like a little dude and a little chick. And I know this is gender stereotyping, and I'm sorry, but you know, this is just for illustration purposes. I know that there's more complexity than that. So the process to get from our multicellular stage, diploid stage, we got to go through this gate. And this process of going from diploid to haploid is the process of meiosis. Okay, this is what generates. I'm going to draw everything that's in the haploid stage in blue. Okay, this is where we create sperm if you're a dude, or an egg if you're a chick. Okay, now for animals, there is no multicellular haploid stage. It's just this, it's just the sex cells. And then the sex cells will fuse in the process of fertilization to make a cell that has one copy of the chromosomes from dad, one copy of the chromosomes from mom. It's a single cell. You used to be one. That's what we call a zygote. It's the cell that's created through fertilization. Now, this zygote is going to undergo mitosis to make copies and copies and copies and copies of itself, and then have different gene expression to make specialized cells that is eventually going to make an adult. And then that will undergo we'll have specialized cells that undergo mitosis, and now the cycle continues. And that's animals. And that's simple because it's something that we're familiar with. Okay, so I'm going to erase all of this because plants are similar in some ways, but different in other ways. Oopsies, let's keep that haploid marker there. Okay, so plants have a multicellular diploid stage. So I'm going to keep this really general and just draw green circles. So here we have a multicellular stage. Okay, so when you look outside and you see the pine trees and you see the grass and you see the tulips and you see the ferns, they're in this diploid multicellular stage. Within the plant body, there are specialized cells that undergo meiosis to make haploid. Oops, I'm going to draw this in blue. To make 4 haploid cells. Here's what's different about plants. These haploid cells will undergo mitosis to make a multicellular haploid stage. Because we have multicellularity in both haploid and diploid stages, we need to give these special names so that we know what we're talking about. The haploid multicellular stage is called the gametophyte. So phyte means plant. Gameto, this is the plant that makes gametes. So of these cells, some of them are going to differentiate to make a sperm cell, and some in a different individual are going to differentiate to make an egg cell. That's haploid. Now, the same process, there's the same gate to get from haploidville back to diploidville. So we still have the egg and the sperm fuse to form, they fuse through the process of fertilization to form a diploid zygote. And that's going to undergo mitosis to make our multicellular diploid. Now, these cells down here that undergo mitosis, these get a special name of spores. just like that we saw with fungi. Okay, these are spores that grow into our gametophytes. These are the plants that make our gametes. Now, our multicellular diploid stage needs a special name. And these are the guys that make spores. So we're going to call this a sporophyte. Plant, spores. The plant that makes spores. This is our diploid sporophyte undergoes meiosis to make haploid spores. Those grow into our multicellular gametophytes that produce gametes. Those gametes fuse through the process of fertilization to make a diploid zygote. Now we're back in diploidville and the cycle continues. Okay, so that's that way for plants. Okay, it's different because they have this multicellular haploid stage. That's different from animals. Now we get to talk about the real weirdos on the planet, fungi. Erase all this. Now, the thing about fungi is that they do something that's totally different from plants and animals. There's a whole nother portion of their life cycle. So here we're going to have our ploidyville. So we have diploidville, haploidville, but then fungi do this weird thing that nobody else does, where they have this thing that's called N plus N, our heterokaryon. Okay, so when for the most part, fungi live in their haploid stage. And remember, we have our fungal hypha. Maybe this is septate, maybe it's not. So here's another hypha. And I'm going to give this guy some blue nuclei. But this other hypha, I'm going to make red. So this is how fungi like to hang out in their haploid stage. They're just growing through the soil. They're maybe hanging out in some plant roots. They're decomposing stuff, maybe. They're just kind of chilling, doing their fungal lifestyle, living. But when it's time to reproduce, they undergo a process because so here's diploidville, but we want to get to heterokaryonville. So we have to go through a gate that separates these two different parts of the pasture. So the process that they need to go through is called plasmogamy. So I think of gamy as marriage. So if we think of monogamy or polygamy, so gamy, I think of when I hear that word, I think marriage. So what we're doing is the fungi are marrying their cell juice. So we're going to have, when these two strands come together and they're compatible mating types, they're going to create, there's going to be just one hypha that has a haploid nucleus from mating strand A, and then another haploid nucleus from mating strand B. Now, the big difference is in plants and animals, as soon as two nuclei come together in the same cell, they fuse automatically. That's the first thing they do. They undergo fertilization, but not with fungi. They shack up together and they stay, the nuclei stay separate for a long time. And whenever we see like a mushroom out in the woods. We know that it's getting ready to reproduce. And so all the fungal hyphae that are creating that mushroom that we're seeing, we know is in this heterokaryon stage. It's in this weird N+N thing that nobody else does. Now, still to go through to get from our this part of the pasture in our heterokaryon, these nuclei have to fuse. And we give this a special name because it's so weird. So it's the same as fertilization, basically, but we give it this special name of karyogamy. I might have spelled that wrong, but you get the point. Karyogamy is where the two nuclei, so kary is nucleus, gamy, marriage. So we have our two nuclei that fuse together to create, guess what? A single cell zygote. Now, fungi don't like to be in this diploid stage. So as soon as that zygote is fused, it immediately undergoes meiosis to get back to create spores, 4 spores that have a haploid nucleus. And those spores will germinate and grow into haploid hyphae. And then the collective name of a bunch of hyphae is mycelium. Okay, so that's the fungal life cycle. So that's where it's different. This heterokaryon stage is different from plants and animals. Only fungi do this. Now, remember, the #1 rule of biology is there's always an exception to the rules. And here we're learning rules. So for example, there is a species of fungus or genus of fungus called, Armillaria. That's a plant pathogen that actually lives most of its life cycle as a diploid. So the point of that is for me to say, generally speaking, when the zygote is formed, it immediately undergoes meiosis, but there's always an exception to the rule. So right now for our intro course, we're learning the rules. So hopefully this little video will help you learn the rules of these life cycles and be able to identify how they're similar and how they're different, because that's going to be a major part of the rest of this semester. All right, hope that helps. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You can always email me, come to my office hours, etc. All right, talk to you later. Bye.